Hello, everyone. Good evening. As Daniel said, I have just gotten here about 3:45 this afternoon. I left sometime in the middle of yesterday from New York City. Had a little trouble with snow, and so if my words come out a little strange, forgive me. I wanted to start, tonight we're talking about getting started sort of in the applications independent development kind of business. And as I was talking with Daniel a little earlier today, some of this will apply regardless of the kind of business you might want to be interested in. Whether or not it's building apps per se, or if you decide to open a coffee shop, or if you decide to become a book publisher, or whatever business kind of ventures you go into, a lot of the same sorts of things apply. This is my world, however, in building apps, and so I wanted to talk a little about that. So first, just to kind of get a feel for the room here, since I don't know any of you at all, how many people in here consider themselves primarily wanting to be designers, for a living, like that's what they want to do? You want to do design mainly, or whether it be software or clothing or whatever, some kind of design work. How many in here have also dabbled with development, like to write code, make things like that, build apps and things? Okay, good. How many people love marketing and just want to get into marketing? Okay, a couple, good, okay. How many salespeople? People just love going out there and making a sale. We're getting fewer. Any accountants? Okay. If you want to go into business for yourself, you're going to end up doing all these things. So get used to that concept as we move forward with this. But at this stage, I feel like I should probably talk a little bit about where I came from. When Daniel asked me to do this talk, and he said, I'd like you to talk to my students about how you get started in doing this sort of thing, I had to stop myself for a second and say, well, how did I get started? How did I end up here? How did I end up making apps for a living? And it's, then I wanted to analyze that story and say, well, does any of that still apply? Because I got started 7, 8 years ago, and times have changed, right? Stores change, the world changes, the climate changes. Would any of this stuff still apply? And so I thought back to my very humble beginnings in this whole thing, and when I was in school, as many of you are, I actually was training to become a teacher. I spent 5 years teaching high school English class, literature, Shakespeare, poetry, things of that nature, grammar, which was the fun part. And I did that for a while, so I was not really doing anything even remotely connected to what I'm doing now in terms of how I make my living. But I really feel like that was valuable experience. But I was teaching for a while. I really enjoyed it. But I also kind of had this sort of side love of computers that I had started really early on in high school. I loved playing with graphics in particular. And so I did a lot of kind of graphic design on the side. And I taught myself a little bit of building websites. So when early HTML came out, this is like before CSS. Okay, this is the really ugly stuff where we were still tagging things really, really bad. And I was just always interested in that. I was sort of always kind of doing that. And while I was teaching, I kind of did this other stuff on the side, and I kind of enjoyed that. And as I waned away from loving teaching so much, not because of the students, I love my students, but I just was, I had other reasons why teaching was not for me anymore after about 5 years. I decided to quit and move on to something else, and I had no idea what to do next, except that I had this sort of nice side thing that I had always loved, playing with graphics on computers. And so I decided I'll quit. I had just moved to California. I had just missed the dot-com boom, so all that money that was happening in Silicon Valley in 2000, completely missed out on it. I was teaching school for a meager salary at the time. And then I quit, and I tried to find myself a graphic job just as the entire Silicon Valley flushed out, everyone left. And I found myself a job. I managed to talk myself into a job at a clean energy company, making PowerPoint presentations. This is how untrained I was and how low level, okay? You got to start at the bottom, right? This is about as bottom as it gets. I wasn't even designing the PowerPoint presentations. I was just saving the CFO and the vice presidents from making their presentations look awful. I basically would take what they did with all their extra bold and disgusting typography, and I would just rip all their styling out and put it back into the template the way it was supposed to be in the first place. And I kept telling these guys, like, if you would just stop doing that, then I wouldn't need to be paid. If you would just take the template and type, but they didn't listen. I spent a lot of time with these vice presidents, though. These were mostly financial type guys. They were the CFO of the company, the senior vice presidents, and we were a publicly traded company. And we often did these presentations, for the stockholders. We would do annual shareholder meetings and things like that and this nature. And so I ended up having to fix their PowerPoint presentations way up until 3, 4, 5 in the morning. They would put me up in a hotel, like a $400 hotel room that I would spend an hour in because I was up all night because they were sweating over these numbers and they wanted me in there to make sure that the PowerPoint looked perfect. And I spent a lot of time with these vice presidents, and what I was looking at, I realized after a while, was my future. I was sitting there in a corporate job saying, this is the best it's going to get. I'm going to be one of these guys. And they had a lot of money, and they were not happy. They were working 80, 90 hours a week, and they were making a lot of money, but it was nowhere near the amount of money the company was making. The owners of the company were doing a lot better than they were, no matter how much they were making. You look at some of these vice presidents at companies like Apple, and they're making like $32 million a year. And I'm thinking, wow, that's amazing. And then I realized the company made $87 billion. Where's the rest of that money going? And so I realized that money wasn't making them happy and probably wouldn't make me happy either. And the best I could hope for, and it took me a while to learn this. I stuck it out in corporate for a while, and I kind of build myself up to this sort of director level, creative director, whatever you want to call it. I always said creative director sounds like Don Draper, but it's not. It's a really boring job. So I was doing all that stuff, and I realized this isn't for me. I really want to own my thing. I want to do something of my own. I want to build something that I can say is mine. And I got that little bug in my head. But now you got to realize this is before the mobile revolution. This is before Android. This is before iPhone. This is a time when Microsoft and Adobe and Macromedia and like these giant companies were making software. And if you wanted to make software and be on the cutting edge of design, you had to go work for one of them, basically. There were some indies out there, some people kind of building their own things, but it didn't seem like it was possible. Then the iPhone came along, and that sort of changed everything. I got an email from a friend of mine who is a developer, very, very much a code guy. I'd gone to high school and college with. He had studied computers. He was feeling the same way I was. He had worked for many companies for a long time and realized that it wasn't for him. And he had gotten together with a good friend of his, and he had started a company called Bombing Brain Interactive, right? And they wanted to start making apps. They're like, hey, this iPhone thing is happening. Let's make some apps, see what happens. And so I jumped in. I said, sure. But, what do you need from me? And they said, well, we need graphics. We don't know anything about graphics. We know how to build apps. I said, you can make one of those? They're like, yeah, all right. But we don't know how to make an icon. No problem. I'll make you an icon. So I made them lots of little graphics, and it became a relationship. It built over time. And we made 3 or 4 apps that did nothing. They made like $10. Right? And it was nothing. Everyone else was making millions. We're doing crappy. And then the iPad came along, and we decided to build a teleprompter app. Right? Doesn't sound like a whole lot, just text scrolling. Right? So someone's giving a speech, the text scrolls up. That's basically sounds easy, right? It's not. Right? Building that app and making it good was really hard. But we built that, and for some reason, it did okay. For the first year that it was out, it was the first app we made that sort of made some money. It made a nice chunk of money. And we both looked at each other, the 3 of us looked at each other and said, well, that's kind of cool. I mean, it's not a lot of money, but there's something going on here. This is working out. What can we do with this? And then the next year, we made even more money with that app. And the next year, we made more money with that app. And so over time, it became a bigger and bigger part of our income. And that's when, by then the 3 of us had really caught this bug, and we realized this is what we want to do. I don't want to go back to an office ever again. And if I can help it, that's my goal, is to never build it off. So what am I getting at with all this? Basically, what I'm saying is that all that story, everything I just told you, is pretty much how people go independent, right? There are other ways to do it. But that's not a half bad way to do it. I was working a job, I was making a living, I was able to pay my bills. But at the same time, I had some extra time on my hands. I don't have to watch television for 2 or 4 hours a night. And I could take a couple of hours every night, a couple of extra hours on the weekends, and I can help my friends build something. And over time, it wasn't much of a risk to do that, right? All I was risking was my time. If worse came to worse and it didn't work out, not the end of the world. But at the same time, I was learning, and I was starting to make money. And so that way kind of worked out for me, and I still think it kind of can. However, it's not the only way to do it. If there's one lesson I can have you walk away with tonight, You're going to see people like me all the time. As you want to get into building your own businesses, you're going to see people like me all the time speaking to you, and a lot of them will come at you with like, I did it this way, and this is the way to do it. And they're not even close to right about that. There's never, ever, ever one way to make this happen. I could have quit my job immediately. I could have, used up all of my life savings, right, and lived off that for a year, got my app off the ground. Maybe I would have taken off faster. I could have taken venture capital funding. I could have gotten other rich people to pay me to make my app, right? Then there are downsides to that. I'd have to owe them part of the company and such. But there are lots of ways to go about this thing. This isn't an all or nothing kind of situation. And so I want you to keep that in mind. No matter how much you listen to advice from people like me, I'm hoping that this is not the only talk you ever hear from people who are trying to tell you you can go into business for yourself. You got to listen to all of us. And listen to the ones who succeed and listen to the ones who fail. Listen to what they tell you and then take that piece of advice and figure out how that works for you. Because for everyone who succeeded out there, most of us don't know exactly what we did right. I could tell you the basics of what we did, with our app and some of the marketing techniques that we did that kind of helped us. But those won't necessarily work for you and the kinds of things you want to build. You need to be aware of the fact that every situation is different. You can't go do what the guys from Angry Birds did and make it work. A lot of people have tried, right? It worked for Angry Birds because that was the right moment at the right time, and they built a really cool game at that exact spot, right? And it just happened to work out. Even they couldn't make that happen again if they wanted to. Okay, so you need to work on your own way to do this. And there's, like I said, many, many, many different methodologies that you can employ. Don't limit yourself to one way of thinking. The classic way of doing this, we talk about apps all the time right now, and how many of you on a regular basis spend money on apps versus just downloading free apps? Okay, not that many, but a few. Okay, that's great. A lot of independent developers, right, a couple of years ago when freemium became the big thing, like give the app away for free, charge for some sort of purchase inside the app, right? It became very popular. A lot of developers like me, a lot of independents were starting to say like, oh, the paid apps are dead. This is the only way to make money. And as soon as anyone says that, my brain explodes. And I say, like, I'm selling an app for $25 on the App Store, and we're making more money than most people on the App Store. So clearly, there isn't one way to go about this. So don't let people tell you that something's dead or something's impossible. Or as soon as you hear that sort of language that says, like, only, or this is the way you have to do it, beware of those kinds of terms, because there's always room for a little bit of wiggle room in there. And chances are, if you just try to copy other people's success, you're not going to be able to pull it off because you don't know exactly, you're not living in that situation in that time period that they're in anymore. Okay, so not one way to go about this. Another thing to keep in mind when you're building a business is that you basically have a couple of choices in terms of how much time you want to invest in your project. Some people just quit right away and just try to go full time. I've seen people save up tons of money. They save up like a year's worth of salary working at a job they hate. They quit, and then they spend a year building their app. And if the app flops, then they have nothing. Then they have to go back and work a crappy job for a year. But that works for them. That's what they like to do. Myself, I kind of like the side project concept. I like building things in my spare time because I know spare time is something I can afford. Right? It's mine, it's worth something. I could be going out and consulting or doing design work for other people in that. I mean, I do use some of my time to do that. But that other time, that time when I could be watching a movie for the 50th time or I could be watching a television show, yes, I need to do that once in a while. But I can spare a few of those hours and kind of put them towards a project, something that I'm playing with on the side. I really think there's a lot of value in building a project on the side. There's no downside to doing it this way. There is far less that you're risking because you're not depending on it for your life's, to be able to pay your bills. And at the same time, yes, your time is valuable, but you're going to learn something no matter what. If you build a project and you put it on the store and it flops, you're already way ahead of most of the people who built the thing and then didn't put it on the store. Or the people who half built an idea and didn't really get it to fruition. Or the people who had an idea and never bothered opening the software to start making it. right? Every step of the way, you're learning something about yourself and you're learning something about business. And so I would encourage you to do it this way. It's again, not the only way, but it is a good, safe way to go about doing it. Start building it slow over time. And that's the other key feature of this is time. Many of us are impatient. We like to build something and we think build app, put on store, millionaire, right? I'm gonna like in that order and it happens in 3 days. It really doesn't work that way, especially nowadays. You really need to give yourself, I've been doing this 7, 8 years. I still can't make 100% of my living on just my app. I wish I could, but I still have to do the occasional consulting projects to make ends meet. But I'm confident that in 10 years, 15, 20 years, then I'm making a little more every year. Slow build, right? Be patient. Another thing I could help advise you with, and again, not a requirement, but something that I think helps me a lot, is working with other people. There aren't a whole lot of people out there who can build an app alone. There are a few of us who have built killer apps by themselves, and that's great, or built companies by themselves. But by and large, the majority of people know their own strengths, they know their own limitations. I know that I'm much better at design than I am at code. I do code, I write code because I like learning about that, and I also like knowing more of what the other people on my team need. So like the more I learn about code, the more I can talk to them, I can communicate with them. But I know that's not my primary strength. And so when I work with someone else on a team now, we're sharing the risk and we're sharing the reward, which is kind of nice. The other way of going about this, of course, if you've got some extra pocket change, right, you can always hire somebody to do the parts you don't like to do. I always say hire an accountant, right? I joked about accounting earlier because I don't want to do my accounting, right? Maybe you like doing the numbers. So one of our guys, one of our programmers, he actually does the taxes. He's fine with that. I'm like, you guys, you can hire somebody for that. Nope, I'll do it. All right. Whatever you like to do, you have your strengths, but I could myself say, okay, I'm going to be really disciplined. I'm going to save a bunch of money. I'm going to save whatever it takes to go hire a developer to build me the app that I design. I'll design it. I'll just hire someone to make the app, right? And that's cool because now I get to dictate to that person exactly what I want. I pay them once, and then if the app takes off, I get 100% of that profit, right? That's all mine. I paid that person, and now they're gone, right? But it's a much bigger risk because I had to pay that person tens and 20s or 30,000s, whatever that is in your currency. That's a lot of money, right? I'm going to pay like a lot of money to that person, and that app might sell 0. So I might spend all that money and get nothing back. Bigger risk, bigger chance for reward versus now I could instead partner with that person if I trust that person. I can say, okay, let's build it together. I pay you nothing, but if the app takes off, we share it 50-50, or I get 60-40, or whatever the split is, depending on the duties. You find a fair equilibrium. It's really, really helpful to be able to do that. I find that projects get done. It's sort of like going to exercise at the gym. If you go by yourself, much harder to motivate when you have someone else who's going to be there at 4:30 in the morning, and if you're not going to show up, they're going to know you didn't show up, right? It's a little bit of a motivator to have another buddy, someone else who's going to push you to continue and to finish something. So there are lots of benefits to working on teams. Not to mention that you just learn how to be a better human being when you're learning how to work with other people. You also learn that your ideas aren't always the best ideas, right? When you're the dictator, it's real easy to put yourself into an app for a year, not realizing that it's an app that nobody wants, right? Whereas if you have another person who's a good friend on the side might tell you, maybe that's not so smart. Maybe we shouldn't have one button in the whole app and it doesn't do anything. So keep those things in mind. And like I said, it really is about risk versus reward. There is no reward without some form of risk. But it doesn't mean you have to risk everything in order to succeed. Like I said before, in my story of the way I went about doing this, at no point was I not able to pay my bills. At no point was I not going to be able to eat because I always had enough money coming in without my app until my app was making enough where I can cut back on the regular work. So that's a far longer road. It takes a lot longer to get there. And I'm sharing that money now with 3 people instead of doing it all myself. But at the same time, it's a much safer way to go. And I think over time, that might work out fine for me. But if you're more interested in the fast-paced way of going about it, you're going to have to risk a little more, and that can be scary, right? You don't want, especially as you get older and you have family responsibilities, you know, you don't want to fail at your duties as a family person when you can't bring in the bills and such. So know that you have to risk something, right? You're at least risking your time, you're at least risking your efforts, but the rewards can be quite great in software. This isn't like opening a restaurant. How many people here have ever tried to open a restaurant? Yeah, it's not a business that most people get into nowadays, right? Because you have to find a chef and you have to get a lease. And so you're out tons of money. You have to get a loan from the bank, right? And you're out tons of money. If no one shows up to your restaurant, you're never getting that money back. It's gone. To build an app, the tools you have, right? You already have a phone, you already have a computer, you put them together, you build the thing. And if it flops, all it costs you is your time. And your time is worth something, but it's not like you're not going to be able to pay your bills as a result of that. Software is an amazing opportunity for business. Like 2, 3, 4 generations ago, it wasn't possible to go into business and not risk losing it all, right? And nowadays, it's actually quite easy to go into business and get substantial reward, regardless of your end goals. Even if you don't want to go full-time, you just want to have an app on the side. It's kind of nice to have income coming in, just, you know, extra money you can use for vacations, you can use for other things, you can use it as savings. The nice thing about having a product like that when you own that app is that it keeps paying you. Right now, someone is buying my app. I'm standing here, right? I'm not working on my app. Whereas when you work at a job, and now I'm working at the job, as soon as that clock rings, you know, 5 o'clock, boom, okay, I'm out of here. I stop getting paid until I come back to work. And I'm sitting at the desk, I get paid, I leave the desk, I'm not getting paid. When you have a business, it's not like that. Your business keeps paying you, even when you're sleeping. It's kind of nice. There is more than one kind of business out there in software. A lot of us forget this. We talk about indie development, and a lot of us think about products. We think about making our own apps and selling them. There's also a lot of money to be made and a lot of a really rewarding life to be had as an independent contractor. Someone who's still independent. You're not working for a boss, right, for a single company, but instead you're doing consulting work. You're hiring your services out to other people on a freelance basis. It's risky, you know, in that you don't get paid when all your clients, you have to keep your clients moving. You have to constantly be always out looking for more work. Right? It doesn't just come automatically. But at the same time, once you get a nice client roll going, and you've got a bunch of clients going, and you're not getting all your money from one source, you're also not going to get laid off by that one person. You know, one of your clients might drop you, but it's not the same as your one full-time job firing you or laying you off, right? So there are advantages to that as well, and there's nothing wrong with that. I still consider that independent development. A lot of people don't. They think, oh, you're still working for somebody else. Well, you're always working for somebody else. I'm working for my customers, right? So there's also nothing wrong with combining these two. I mean, that's sort of what I'm still doing. I would like to ultimately get to the point where I'm making all my money on my products, but I also make some of my money on my consulting. And you can find a balance between those two. It can be tricky. At times, the consulting money looks really, really safe and easy and attractive because they'll pay you a lot of money to build something, and they don't care if it's going to be a hit app because they don't need a hit app, right? A lot of times you're working for like an enterprise situation where they just want to give their app to their salespeople. They're not looking to make money directly on the app itself. And so they'll throw all kinds of money at the app, and you'll make that money. But you also only make that money once, right? And as soon as that project's over, it's over. So the risk here with running a kind of combined consulting and product business is that you will spend too much time on your consulting and not have enough time for your products so that you'll never get your products off the ground. Or you'll spend too much time on your product and you won't have any money because you're not going out there looking for consulting work. You'll look at the consulting as a distraction, in other words. And I definitely fight that myself all the time. There are many, many times where I'd much rather be working on my own app, but I have to go pay the bills, right? So it's a discipline, but again, there's nothing wrong with that. This is another way of going about doing this. And like I said, some people are happy to just stay consultants because it's safer in many ways. Okay, so if you're going to go into products, or even if you're going to go into consulting, you have to remember that this isn't all about the product. I really wish that you could just build a great app and it was the coolest thing that anyone ever put on their phone and that meant you would be a millionaire. It doesn't work that way. I don't know how many times, like I talk to developers all the time. I talk to indies. Most of them are like you. They're either designers or they're developers. They're not salespeople. They're not marketing people. They're not accountants. They're not operations people. They're not HR. They don't want to do any. They stopped working at companies because they hated all those people, right? And they thought, I just want to do design. I'm going to design. I'm going to go find a developer. I'm going to build this app, and we're going to just take off, and it's all going to just work out. And then you realize, wow, the salespeople actually did something at my company. They sold my product. Right? The marketing people actually did something at my company. They actually made other people aware of my product. Right? You ever see an ad for an app on the subway or on a train? That's a marketing person doing their job. Did you know about that app before you saw it on the train? Maybe you did, right? But you saw it 15,000 times. How many people are watching sporting events and they see commercials for apps? Okay, that's marketing. Now, we as independents can't afford television commercials. They're way too expensive, but there are many, many other forms of marketing. We could be sponsoring popular blogs, podcasts, other things. There are ways to get the word out. There are ways that aren't even advertising, right? There's your own blog. You could be writing your own stuff and getting other people to read it. I sell more apps when I write more on my blog. It literally works out that way. The more articles I write, I don't write about my apps that much, right? I write about other people's apps, or I write about the business. And people just are looking at my blog and they're like, oh, this guy's kind of cool. I wonder if he has any apps. Oh yeah, he does. Here's his app. Boom, and I get a sale, right? You have to make an effort beyond. If all you want to do is build products, you can't run a business because no one will ever find your product. You can make the best product in the world. If no one knows it exists, you're never going to get it. It's a shame, but it's the way it works, right? Somehow you got to get the word out about your app. So that means you have to learn about this. You have to be willing to read about marketing, read about advertising, learn from other people's mistakes, talk to other people. I'm constantly going to conferences. I'm constantly traveling around and talking to other app developers and asking them, what do you do? Right? What do you do for advertising? What do you do for this? Have you ever tried, sponsoring this thing? Did that work out? And you have to constantly be curious about those sorts of things. You can't look at it as this icky thing that I don't want to touch. Because the longer you avoid that, the longer you're going to be sitting there getting angry that no one's buying your apps. And you're going to think it's the world's fault and they're just stupid and they don't know a good app when they see one. But the fact of the matter is it's not that they don't like your app. They've never heard of your app. And they're never going to. The app stores, you look at the Google Play Store, you look at the iOS App Store. Discoverability, right? What are the chances anyone's going to find your app in that sea of millions of apps that are sitting out there? Even if they search, have you ever searched on the App Store? You're not, if you're not making a venture-funded giant multi-million-dollar game that Apple happens to be promoting, you're going to be number 58th in the search. What was the last time you bought the thing on, number 58 on the search? It doesn't work that way. You have to make the effort to go out there. And that takes learning, and it takes time away, again, from building the app, right? You have to think about building a business, not just a product. And that's really, really hard to get over. Really, really hard. For the first couple of years, I was just loving the fact that I could make my app and not worry about it. And then when I realized that I wasn't making enough money, that's when I realized, oh, there's another component to this that I'm missing out on. And it can be very rewarding. Here's the good news. Marketing, advertising, sales. Sales is hard, but it's not brain surgery, right? Marketing is difficult. It's hard work, but it's not as difficult as learning how to program, okay? The concepts, the basic concepts are there, and they're as old or ancient, right? Getting human psychology and understanding how to persuade someone to buy something of yours, that's actually easier than building the product itself. That's why a lot of us feel like it's unfair, because we put all this work into building the app, but that's just the way it works, trust me. So your app is only the beginning. Whatever, and it doesn't have to be an app, whatever your product is, that's the start of your business. I came up with this idea, right? And we all know that ideas are worthless until we execute on them, right? Then we spend all this time executing. We put a year or 6 months or 9 months into building this thing that we think is brilliant. And then we're just getting started. We put the thing out on the store, and that in and of itself is an accomplishment, but what happens is your 5 friends buy the app, and then the next day you get 0 sales, and the next day you get 0 sales, and you're like, it's just a little, next week it'll pick up. Next day, nothing, next day, nothing, next day, nothing, and you realize, oh, right, I'm just getting started. And for a lot of people, this is the point where they give up. They say, like, all right, I built this app and nobody came. Okay, that's all their fault. It's all Apple's fault. It's all Google's fault. And then they just go build another app, or they try to put the money or the time back into the app. Oh, it doesn't have this one feature. That's why no one's buying it. I'm going to go add more features. And you keep adding features to the app. You're spending all your time in the app because that's where you're comfortable. That's what you like doing. You like opening Photoshop. You like opening Illustrator. You like opening Xcode. You don't like opening a marketing book, right? So it really is a discipline, and it really does take a lot of time and effort away from the things you love to do. Guess what? If you want to run a business, you're not going to love everything about it, just like you don't love everything about a full-time job, right? There's just no way that you're going to like every single aspect of what you do. There are going to be times when you have to pay your taxes and you can't stand doing that. Or maybe you like doing the taxes, but you hate doing the advertising, whatever it is. There's going to be some part of it that isn't great. I think it's still worth it because ultimately my goal isn't to be rich and it isn't to avoid doing a couple things I don't like to do. I just don't like sitting in a cubicle, right? I don't like not owning what it is that I do for a living. So, a valid question is this even possible anymore? A lot of debate has been going on recently. A lot of numbers have been coming out, particularly on the iOS side, but I know Android has similar situations where a lot of developers who are independent are out there struggling, they're working hard, they're doing their best, and a few of us started sharing our numbers with the world and saying like, hey, here's how many apps I actually sold. And these are some prominent people that everyone else thought were doing really well, and they realized, wow, they're making less money than they would if they just, this programmer could make a lot more money if he just went to go work for Twitter, but instead he's working for himself and he's making less money, and it doesn't compute in people's heads, and so you get a lot of like downer kind of attitudes going on. A lot of people in the independent community are like, oh, it's all being taken over by the rich companies, and it's not possible to make a living, and so on and so forth. I don't agree with that assessment. I think it's very much possible to make a business viable selling software. I don't believe that people don't value software. I think that most people don't value software, but most people don't value anything. Most people want free, right? So don't compete with free. If you want to go into the hamburger restaurant business, are you going to try to beat McDonald's? No. You're going to make a boutique little craft gourmet burger shop that makes burgers for people who don't like McDonald's, right? If you want to make beer, you're not going to compete with the giant brands of beer. You're not going to try to make Budweiser, right? You're not going to try to compete with them. You're going to make a craft local beer, only can be found in Warsaw, right? Local brewery. Master crafted by blah, blah, blah in these containers that were made of blah, 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 right? We all know that craft philosophy. Those businesses are very successful because there's a very small number of people who don't want the generic thing that everyone else wants. There's a very small group of people who are kind of snobbish about what they eat and drink and what they use on their computers. You have to go find them and then appeal to them and then charge them a lot of money. Okay? And this is where I come back to this point where people are saying like, oh, you have to make your app 99 cents because, all these games are 99 cents, or you have to make your app free because all these other apps are free. I'm like, yeah, and they have billions of dollars that you don't have, right? They're going to make their money 5 years from now. They don't care about making money today. I need to make money today, so I can't compete with someone who's willing to give away their app for free. I can't compete with someone who's willing to make their app for 99 cents. You cannot live on 99 cents per person. If you're doing your own viral marketing, you're not going to get there. All right? That pricing scheme assumes that most people will buy your app, right? At 99 cents, if all 84 million people who bought an iPhone, or 74 million, I think, bought an iPhone last quarter, went and bought your app, then you're doing fine, right? But they're not going to. Most of them are never going to download an app that isn't free. Most of them aren't going to download apps at all. The problem with the mobile revolution is that it's gotten this notion in our heads that suddenly there are more customers, but there aren't. Not for our little indie projects, okay, with our little products. There's always been that small number of people who actually are interested in paying for good things. You have to keep targeting them, right? Just because they bought a nice phone doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily buy every app that comes out that's 99 cents. So think about that. So yes, I believe business is viable. I think this thing is doable. I am almost doing it, right? I'm making a decent living and I'm not sitting in a cubicle. I'm happy. If I can keep that going for the next 30, 40 years of my life until I'm ready to retire, then I've succeeded, right? I'm not living on a desert island, tropical island, having fun every day and not working. No, that's not what I want. I actually like working. So, could I be more successful? Can I make even more money? Yeah, there's some of us who are making even more money than that. That's great. But that's not my goal. If you want to get into this thing, do it because you love doing it, because you love bringing good things into the world. Don't do it because you think you're going to get rich really fast, because, man, that's not happening. All right? May have happened for a few people when the mobile thing first started happening, right? Just like when the internet first happened, a bunch of people made a lot of money fast. That stuff doesn't last long. After that, you have to start to see the people who succeed long term are the ones who really dig into the business side of it, and who fail and fail and fail and fail and fail, and then they succeed. Right? You talk to any successful business person, and they'll tell you that they've had a lot more flops than they have hits. Same way as musicians, right? They write songs, and somebody happens to love one of them out of the 12 that they put on their album, and that 12 that they put on their album is only the 12 that they're showing you, because they actually wrote 50 at home that most people will never hear. That's the nature of things. So I think if you want to go into this and you really want to build your own apps, you need to just have some realistic expectations. I don't want you to walk out of here thinking like, oh, I just got to go work a day job now. Forget this. It's too hard. Right? I want you to try it. I want everyone here to try it because it doesn't cost you much. But just be realistic about it. Build your app. Get it on the store. There's nothing like that feeling when you see it in the store. Like, oh my God, here I am on the Google Play Store, and there's my app. It's like a neat feeling to know that someone else. And then even if your app kind of flops, and like I have a couple apps I built that they get bought like once or twice a week. And it's still a joy every time someone buys it. I'm like, wow, someone bought my app today. Okay, that's cool. I just want to write to them and say, like, why did you buy my app? Can you tell to like 50 of your friends? But it's still a cool feeling. Like someone bought something that I made. Or someone writes to me and says, that thing you made is really, really cool. I wish it did this too. Or have you thought about this? Now I'm communicating. I realized I'm putting something in the world that somebody actually liked. That in and of itself is rewarding. So don't shy away from this thing thinking it's just too hard and I can't make it happen. Don't feel like it's not worth it if you can't make $1 billion doing it. I think it's totally worth it if you only make $10, right? Because you're going to learn so much about yourself, especially if you dig into the business stuff. If you go beyond building an app, which is hard enough, and you actually start learning about business, you start learning about the psychology of people and what they are motivated by and what actually is valuable to them, I really think you're going to learn a lot about yourself. And I don't know. To me, that's pretty cool. So thank you, everyone. I think that's my time. I wasn't paying attention. And I guess I will take questions at this time, and Daniel will do the translations.
You said something about very ugly PowerPoint typography. So the question is why you use the fake small caps in yours?
Oh, good question. Fair point. I thought it was Futura, so I'd get away with it, but no, you're right.
I was wondering about the marketing, because I at first thought that marketing is just putting money into advertising, but then I realized that a lot of that is just, I don't know, putting the word out or writing blogs. And how do you, like, what's the proportion of just putting money into advertising and kind of organic marketing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So he's asking about the split there. Like, marketing is a lot more. A lot of people think of marketing as just advertising. And I really think of marketing as separate from advertising. Advertising is a whole field in and of itself, and it will cost you money to get ads, right? So in many cases, recently on my blog, actually, there's a guy out there named John Saddington. He has an app called Desk. It's a blogging app for Mac. And he talked about, he made like $65,000 with this app. But he had spent $30,000 in advertising to make that happen. But that was early on, and so he was happy with the fact that half his money was going into the ads, because he figures in the long run that's going to get the word out in the app. That's really hard to do when you're an independent, right? You don't have that kind of money. You're like, I don't have $30,000 to risk on my app. So how do you get beyond that? Well, there are lots of ways to get the word out that don't necessarily cost money right away. You mentioned blogging, which is really good. It's hard, believe me. I've been blogging for 10 years. I finally got to the point now where I can write something and more than 5 people read it. It takes a long time. Most of the time it's your 5 friends, and even they get bored with you and move away. But then, like, you keep writing smart stuff. Eventually, some journalist, somebody out there notices that you wrote something cool, and they will So once you get that built up, so this is time, but again, it's another one of those things that only costs you time. I think that blogging is really, really important. Another thing that we did with our teleprompter app is, we're making software for this, but there's also a lot of hardware accessories for tablets that you can slide your tablet into there, and it like gives you one of those mirror projectors so that they can read it backwards mirrored. And so a couple of those hardware companies wrote to us and they said, we don't want to make an app. We kind of like your app. Do you mind putting a link to our hardware on your website? We'll put a link to your software on our website. And we did that kind of cross-exchange of links. Cost us nothing. It took me 5 minutes to add a recommended hardware page. And I put a bunch of these hardware accessories on our page. And one side benefit of that, not only are now people who are going to their website seeing our link and going to us and back and forth, but the other thing I didn't think about at the time was that those hardware guys go to trade shows. They go to like NAMM and NAB and like these big trade shows that we can't afford to go to. And when they go there and they set up their hardware, what are they showing? Our app, right? And so that costs us nothing. And now they're telling all the people at these trade shows about our app. It's like the smartest thing we ever did by a long shot. There are opportunities like that. Now, isn't always some hardware accessory that goes along with your app. But if you can find some way to cross-promote with other people, I think that can be very helpful. Marketing comes in so many different forms. Sometimes it's just a matter of getting the right people. Like maybe you can't afford a sponsorship, but you might be able to get someone interested, a blogger interested in your app, who just get it in front of their face and then they talk about it for free. Right? Once in a while, you'll get those kind of little freebies out there if you hustle. You can't treat it though like a really hard sales pitch. Right? Twitter's another great form of marketing. You can't sell things on Twitter. You all know this, right? When the tweets start coming out and they're all like real addy, you just like out. I'm not following this person. Or you mute them or you block them. But if you're really subtle about it and you know how to jump into a conversation and say like, well, hey, I've got this product that does this sort of thing, you can get word out that way as well. So there's a lot of ways to market way beyond advertising. I don't think that you can get away with not advertising ultimately. I think advertising is also important, but when you're starting out and you don't have a lot of money, one of the best things to do is first off save especially, and this is why I recommend doing side projects. If you're doing it as a side project, you don't need that money, right? That's money you didn't have. You still got your full-time job, you're doing your thing. Don't spend that money on parties, right? Take that money and save it and save it and save it until you have a lot of money banked up. Now you can maybe afford to start experimenting with advertising. Because the trick with advertising is if you put out one ad, it probably won't do much. You have to put out enough ads where it's effective, right? There's a reason why people make television commercials and podcasts and Squarespace advertises everywhere. I don't know if it's like that here, but like in New York, like they're all over every subway and they're on every podcast. And they know that the same people are listening to these same podcasts. But if I hear that ad 5 times, now it's in my head, right? It's like it permanently sticks in your head. I do think that there are lots of ways to go about the marketing angle that don't necessarily cost you money, especially when you're starting out. So definitely would encourage you to learn about those. Good question. Yeah.
I'm curious if you have any experience with that, with crowdfunding, because you were talking about just developing an app as a side project, and I know that me as a student, I probably won't be able to do it as easily because it's I don't have a lot of time, and I'm curious, what do you think about crowdfunding, like as a means of getting funds to develop an app a different way?
Yeah, the question is about crowdfunding, and I think it's really interesting. Again, another one of those things that makes me happy I'm doing this now, because crowdfunding, 20 years ago without the internet would have been a lot harder. The trick with we just started experimenting with our podcast. I do this podcast about business called Release Notes with my friend Charles Perry. Again, I started doing that podcast because I wanted to learn more than anything else. It's not like I'm trying to say, here's all the stuff I know about business. It gives me an excuse to talk about it every week. But we recently started a Patreon thing on our website, so people can pay us. And I'm still shocked that anyone does, but yeah, we're getting like now $35 a month from people who are just willing to give us money for a free podcast. because they like what we do and they just want to give it. Again, there's some people who will pay, right? I've got an app called Pedometer Plus Plus, made by this guy, David Smith. All it does is it's, the phone's got those chips in it that automatically track my steps. And this one just lays them out in a really nice way. And the app is free, and he has a tip jar in there. It just says like, hey, pay me whatever you want. And so I keep giving him $5 every month or two because I'm like, I want him to keep making this app, and I kind of, I like what he's doing. It's weird. Like it's the first time ever I had an app that I could pay for more than once. It was kind of nice. But crowdfunding, like to say, like I'm going to build this project, like Kickstarter and Indiegogo. There's lots of websites cropping up for these sorts of things. The trick with that is you've got to be someone who's willing to hustle and get the word out in a way that I'm not necessarily great at. So I have shied away from that only for that reason. That I'd be afraid. It's like I'm gonna have a party next Friday, right? I'm gonna invite 100 people and no one shows up. Man, that's embarrassing. It makes you feel really terrible. Whereas there are some people that are really good at that. They know if they invite 100 people that 110 people are gonna show up, right? Some people are just naturally gifted at getting the word out and getting other people interested in what they're up to. So if you have that kind of tendency, or you're willing to get out there and hustle for that, I think it's a very interesting and effective way to do it. The other trick is to make sure you deliver on what you promise. A lot of people don't, right? They'll collect the money and then they never build the app, and that brings people down on the concept. Like, hey, I really wanted to. I think the best Kickstarters out there, the best Indiegogo campaigns, are the ones that aren't necessarily. They make it clear that you're not buying their product early. In other words, you're helping them build the product. You're investing in the company in some way. Maybe you're going to get some small intangible where I'll give you a few stickers, or I'll say a nice thing about you on the internet. Like that'll be the reward. But they're not necessarily expecting the product. They're expecting that they just helped you. And so if you can craft your message that way, I think it could be very effective. And again, it's something that didn't exist not very long ago, and now the internet makes really, really, really easy. And most of these sites charge very little percentage-wise of what you make to make that happen. So I think it's a cool thing to experiment with, definitely. Anybody else?
I work for a company, and I'm responsible for mobile part of the product. And I have a problem with my marketing team because they are not mobile at all. So I have to fight each day for some better showing of my part of the whole thing. Do you have any advice, any books, any websites, anything that you could, I don't know, tell me so I can convince them to be more, interested in mobile?
Right. How do we convince? That's a great question. How do we convince people who aren't yet on the mobile revolution, haven't woken up yet to the fact that the world has gone mobile?
Actually, it's more general.
Yeah. But no, I mean, that's a very hard thing to do because I think for people like that, most of the time, the only thing that works is numbers. You kind of have to show them numbers, right? You have to show them somebody doing something mobile, some effective marketing campaign on mobile that worked, and show them why it worked. And that's tricky. Like even something as simple as saying let's stop doing our ads in Flash because that doesn't work on any phone anymore, or let's start formatting this stuff for the small screen where it belongs. Like getting people to understand that we're living in a mobile world. For young folks like you, that's super easy, I would hope, because most of you are probably on your phone a lot more often than you are on a laptop even, or a desktop. Getting people who have been on desktops and on computers for a long time to understand that nothing's happening there anymore the same way. I'm not saying those places aren't important and that there is money to be made there as well. There's a lot of people making money making Windows software. But I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know if I have any specific books right now at the moment. There's a couple of really good. I don't know if it would do the marketing strategy, but there's a book company called An Event Apart. Or I'm sorry, a List Apart. They do independent books, and there's a couple of. There's one that's called Mobile First Strategy, but I think that's mostly for just saying basically this is how we have to build our websites, because people who are visiting our websites, aren't. But which is part of your marketing, right? Your mobile website. But as far as I'd have to think about that some more. Yeah, I'm not 100% certain on the specifics there. But yeah, all I can say is that it's tough because I've come face to face with people who are very reluctant to realize that times have changed. Especially, I mean, I'll run into the same problem with engineers in a lot of cases for clients I work for. And I'll say like, we can build this thing and I can make it really nice, but it's not going to work on a phone, so it's useless because half your crowd or more than half your crowd is never going to see it. And they don't want to hear it because that would mean rewriting their whole backend, and they don't want to do that. And it's like, well, then what's the point, right, if we're not going to move to where our customers are? Keeping the customers in the center of the conversation usually helps, but sometimes it's really, really hard.
Yeah, I've got a question, anonymous question, with a trust issue. Aren't you afraid to work with a developer that you aren't familiar with? That they can steal your idea, take it, and make it a better version of it?
Great question. Yeah. So I mentioned working with teams, right? And then working with other people, finding a developer if you're a designer, and you're saying, well, what if I find somebody and they turn out to be untrustworthy? Yeah, that's a risk. I joke a lot. I did this talk in Philadelphia a while back in October. And at the beginning, I talked about my friends who were there in the crowd who I work with, these two best friends of mine who I've known since high school. And I joke that people say you shouldn't work with your friends because it ruins your relationships or whatever. And I always say like those are people who don't know how to pick good friends. The nice thing about working with your friends is that you trust them, you know them, you know they're not going to, you know where they live. They're not going to take your money and run with it, right? Because you're going to show up at their door. But sometimes you have to take risks. Like sometimes you have to get into a contract situation. That's where the legal documentation comes in really, really handy. And that's a whole other aspect I didn't mention here is, and I should have, is the legal aspect of what you're doing. I come from the United States where we are even more legalese and sue happy than anybody else on earth. I mean, we sue restaurants for serving their coffee too hot, for crying out loud. So we're really stupid about that stuff, but what that means is that we have to protect ourselves. And the nice thing about writing up a contract, when you're going into business with someone else, you really want to have a written agreement that you didn't write, that some lawyer wrote. It will cost you a little bit of money, but that will protect both of you. And that's the key. It's not like, hey, I don't trust you, so sign this paper. It's more like, let's just write down what we both think this company is and what our arrangement is. If I say I'm going to get 60%, you're going to get 40%, let's write that down so that when we're arguing one day about, the $1 million and how we split it up later, that we'll have it on a piece of paper. We won't have to argue about it. It's there, right? Once it's written down and it's capsulated and someone else signed it and it's on paper, then people tend to be more serious. And by and large, people you don't know who you're trying to get into business with, if they won't sign a contract like that, then chances are you don't want to do business with them. You want to have some kind of a written agreement, and that will protect you in that case, and it will protect them as well. So, a lot of times, like I said, the hardest part of that is being the first one to mention it, right? To say like, hey, we probably should write this stuff down, shouldn't we? But as you get older and you have a spouse and you have a family, you have children and things like that, that stuff becomes much more apparent. Then it's like, wow, here's my life's work, and if I die, right, is my wife going to be able to get her fair share of this money? Well, if it's not on paper, guess what? She's not. Right? So those kinds of things become more, strong in your mind as you get older with that thing. But yeah, don't get burnt. Learn that early. Like, write this stuff down, make it agreements, and I think you'll be better off that way. You'll find more trustworthy people that way. But yeah, I don't like to do business with complete strangers. I also like getting referrals. I like it when someone I know and trust says, hey, I worked with this developer before. She's got a new project idea. She's looking for a designer. Oh, great. Okay, at least I know someone who knows her, right? And so now I feel a little more comfortable. And in the beginning, you don't know a whole lot of people, right? So it's a little harder to do. But as you get older and as you're going to conferences and you're meeting more people in your profession, you go to these meetups, right? You start to develop relationships with people, and it becomes easier. Great question.
Heffler and Fresh Jones should listen to your answer a few years back.
Oh, we've all made a mistake. Yeah, don't get me wrong. I've worked without a contract before, and I've gotten burnt, so this is why I'm telling you.
Do you have team to test your apps?
Oh, that's a good question. Testing.
Usability, how it works, and
yes, we do have beta testers. We didn't initially, which was a mistake. We put apps out there, and sometimes we don't go through our testers. Again, it's hard when there's 3 people and you're a small business and you say to yourself, oh, we got to get this update out. And it's 3 months late, and let's get it out there because everyone thinks the app is dead and no one's updating it. And so we finish it, and at the last second, we make a change. We realized this actually last year. We're putting out a major update. And we put it out in the store, and the last second, right before we submitted it, we said, oh, we got to make this one change. I'll do this thing. And that one change that we made it impossible to make a new document in the app. But we didn't test that because we didn't think that this thing all the way over here on the app would have anything to do with that. But it made sense logically when we thought about it later. But like suddenly you couldn't make a new document, which is like the worst thing. Like I open the app and I can't make a new document. What am I going to do? Luckily we caught that. Like we submitted it, and because we had to wait for Apple to approve it for 7 days, we were able to catch it ourselves. Like I was like, hey, I was playing with the app and I can't make new documents. So then we were able to reject it and start over. But the point is, yes, you should always be testing. If you make a change anywhere in your app, someone other than you should play with it before it goes to the public. Because they're going to find, especially if you could find good testers. The big problem with betas, especially when you're an indie, is that you're a small company, right? You have a small name. You don't have a lot of people. You have friends, right? And your friends are like, oh, I'll test your app. They just want a free copy of it, right? Or whatever. They're going to play with it for 3 seconds, and they're not really going to test it. You have to tell them, here's a checklist. Run all these things, do this, do that. You know, if you find any problems at all. And over time, you learn who your good testers are versus the people who just casually want to play around. You know, the bigger your testing pool is, the better. You've got a lot of opportunity there. Let's get the thing into as many hands as you can, and if you can find usability experts, people who are really, really good at testing, I highly encourage you to do that, even to the point where eventually you're going to want to start paying people to do that professionally. But again, it depends on the size of your app and how much it's growing. If you're still in that stage where you're making $10 a month, you probably can't afford that. But as your app grows, you need to start investing in those things because it will matter. Nothing hurts your reputation more than an app that crashes when you updated it. And it was like, this app was working perfectly for me. Especially, we make professional apps, right? Our teleprompters, people use them to make videos, right? They hire a talent, they hire an actor to come in and read a speech, and they're making a commercial or whatever, and they're reading off the thing as they're doing their act, right? If my app crashes, now suddenly that person was counting on me, the app was working great, now I made an update, they updated it, and it crashes, that they just wasted their whole day. They had to pay the actor for the day, they had to go back to their client and explain why they couldn't make the commercial in time. That makes them really angry, and an angry customer is not only a lost customer, it's probably a lost 50, 60 customers down the road because they're never going to recommend you to anyone ever again. So yeah, testing, big deal. And we don't do it enough, and we do a little more every time. But we need to get better about that, definitely. I think everyone should. Any other questions?
It's like iCloud with Apple.
Yeah, well, yeah. And it's...
Once I put my keynote in the Berlin talk in the cloud, I came to Berlin and it just was gone.
Yes, that has happened to me once or twice with Apple's iCloud, where I put a document that I'd been working on for months and it just disappeared. And that never happened to me in Dropbox. But even if I still don't trust Dropbox enough, I still keep an extra file somewhere. Keep an extra copy somewhere. Yeah, I mean that's unfortunate. I mean that's what a lot of longtime Apple nerds like me have been complaining about lately, is that Apple stuff is becoming less reliable. They're stretching themselves too thin. And they might even be testing it. They don't even know that bug's there, and they just simply don't have time to fix it because keynote's coming up. We got to release the new iPhone in September, so therefore this new operating system needs to be ready, whether the bugs are there or not. That's a dangerous attitude. Apple gets away with it for now, but over time, as you erode your customers' love for you, there is nothing more important, especially as you're starting an independent business for yourself, is to have a few key customers who love what you make. If they love your product, they will sell it to people for you, right? You don't need customers who are just going to buy it and play with it for 5 seconds and then toss it aside. You need people who will use it every day and be like, oh, wow, this is my favorite app ever. Oh, you got to get this. And whenever their friends say, oh, what apps are you playing with? Oh, get this one. Those are the people you got to find, because and making those people angry is the dumbest thing you can do. So yeah, I think Apple's got a couple billion of us now, so they can get away with it for a while. But sooner or later, that's going to come back to bite you every time. So yeah, keep your customers happy.
Okay, so really, thank you for your time. Thank you for coming here, and enjoy your stay.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah.